I said it calmly through the intercom fingers resting lightly on the glass desk. On the security monitor in front of me, my parents stood fidgeting in the executive lobby of Kingdom Ventures, the investment firm I built from scratch. They had no idea the CEO they were nervously waiting to meet was me. And I wasn't in any hurry to change that. The room was silent enough for me to hear the soft tapping of my mother's heels against the marble floor. She wore a navy blue designer dress, her hair perfectly styled as always. My father glanced down at his Rolex again. Third time in a minute. They were anxious, finally, and for the first time they were the ones waiting on me. Every morning I start with a strong espresso and a 10-minute walk from my apartment to headquarters. I don't need directions. I designed this place. Whether it's a Monday morning or a late Friday night, I'm usually here working through the silence, tightening bolts on a machine no one thought I could build. My name is Ava Morgan. I'm 29 years old. Founder and CEO of Technova, one of the fastest-growing digital payment platforms in the country. But if you ask my parents, I'm just the quiet daughter who works with computers. The Morgans are an old-school finance family, 3 generations deep in Wall Street connections and private golf club dinners. Success to them comes with navy suits, scheduled board meetings, and investment portfolios you can brag about at cocktail parties. What I built didn't fit the narrative. I didn't inherit the Morgan pride. I inherited the silence. My older sister Sienna is the family's shining star. 2 years older, picture perfect in every holiday card, always dressed like she walked off a lifestyle magazine. Right after college, she launched Lumina, a luxury wellness brand fully funded by our parents. Every family gathering is basically a Sienna appreciation hour. Sienna just opened her 3rd location. Sienna was featured in Modern Elegance magazine. Sienna's hosting a retreat in the Hamptons next month. Me, Ava's doing something with tech. I think she's got an app or a company? Not sure. I stopped trying to correct them years ago. I wasn't jealous, not in the way people usually mean. I didn't want spa openings or curated Instagram moments. I wanted something more dangerous. I wanted respect. And maybe that's what made me so invisible to them. I wasn't loud. I didn't complain. I didn't need to be rescued. I just worked. While Sienna got weekly check-ins and funding rounds from mom and dad, I got passive-aggressive emails asking if I'd consider getting a real job. They never asked what I was building, never saw the server racks I kept in my 1-bedroom apartment. Never noticed the VCs who slowly started showing up in my inbox, and definitely never thought I'd be the one holding the pen when their company was on the brink of collapse. But I didn't need them to believe in me. I just needed them to underestimate me long enough for me to finish what I started. And now, they're here, in my lobby, waiting to meet the visionary CEO from Kingdom Ventures, the one their friends have been talking about, the one whose offer might save their failing company. Funny how quiet the world gets when it finally realizes who you've become. There's a family photo on my parents' mantle, taken at one of those perfectly staged holiday brunches. Everyone's smiling. My father's holding a champagne glass. My mother's pearl necklace glows under soft lighting. Sienna's in the center, radiant in red, holding a mimosa and laughing effortlessly. I'm standing at the far left corner, almost out of frame. Cropped by life, I guess. That photo used to bother me. Now it's just proof. Sienna's always been easy to love. She says the right things, makes friends within 5 minutes. She was homecoming queen, graduated with honors, and was the type of daughter who made parenting look like a Hallmark movie. I don't blame her for being who she is, but I do blame my parents for pretending that I didn't exist beside her. It wasn't just the compliments at dinner, it was the way my accomplishments were treated like trivia. When I landed my first angel investor for Technova, Dad's only response was, "Make sure it's not a scam, sweetheart." When I made Forbes' 30 Under 30 shortlist, Mom blinked and asked, "Is that a real magazine or one of those startup blogs?" But when Sienna's wellness spa opened, they hosted a catered party with champagne fountains and custom-engraved candles. Dad even gave a toast. He said, and I quote, "Sienna's work is a reflection of everything we value in this family." That line stuck with me. Everything they value, which clearly never included me. I learned to stop sharing my wins with them. It wasn't worth the confusion on their faces or the awkward silences. I started directing my updates to Charlotte, my assistant, the only one who actually listened. Charlotte had been with me since Technova was just a name on a pitch deck. She saw what it took. The late nights, the burnouts, the days I questioned whether it was all worth it. And she saw how every time I got knocked down, I got back up with more data, more clarity, and more fire. My parents didn't see any of that. They just saw someone quiet, someone safe to ignore, until 6 months ago. That was the day they invited me to Sunday brunch, something they usually reserved for investor friends or charity board members. I almost didn't go. But something in Mom's voice sounded rehearsed. Sweet, careful, like she was lining up a pitch. So I showed up, just to see what kind of game they were playing this time. The moment I walked into their penthouse, everything felt too pristine. The table was already set. Dad was dressed in a full suit on a Sunday. Mom wore that fake smile she reserved for guests she wanted to impress. "We need to discuss something," she said, slicing a croissant like it was a business contract. "It's about your trust fund." I remember going still. I had waited 25 years for that moment, the day I'd finally accessed the $2 million my grandmother had left for me. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It meant someone, even if she was gone, had believed in me enough to give me a future. I was 2 weeks away from turning 25, and somehow I already knew what they were about to say. "Sienna needs it more." Mom continued, not even meeting my eyes. "Her wellness brand is expanding into the West Coast, and she needs capital to secure the properties." I blinked. "My startup employs over 40 people," I said slowly. "We're building patented technology. I don't even draw a salary." Dad waved a hand dismissively. "Playing with apps isn't a business, Ava. Real estate is tangible. Sienna's doing something real." I felt something inside me crack, not loudly. Quiet, like a floorboard giving way beneath years of weight. So that's what I was. Not real, not worthy, just a placeholder until Sienna needed funding. And they didn't even flinch when they told me. "The paperwork's already been signed," Dad said flatly, like he was informing me the weather had changed. I looked down at my untouched coffee. It had gone cold like everything else in the room. "What do you mean signed?" I asked. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "We had to act quickly," Mom replied, brushing imaginary crumbs off her linen napkin. "Sienna's deal was time-sensitive. She needed the funds before the end of the quarter. You transferred my trust fund." My throat tightened. "It's not like that," she said quickly. "We're your parents. We have discretion, and the money is still technically in the family." I let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Technically. It was my grandmother's money. Legally designated for me when I turned 25. She'd even written me a letter when I was a teenager, folded it into the birthday card she sent me one year, telling me how proud she was that I asked more questions than I answered, that she believed in who I was becoming, that someday she hoped that money would help me build something bigger than myself. Apparently my parents didn't share that hope. "Sienna's brand needs this to scale," Dad added. "She's bringing holistic wellness to luxury markets. It's a smart move, and you know how difficult fundraising can be in that space." I stared at him, trying to find the father I used to believe in. "You think I don't know how hard fundraising is?" I asked. "You think I haven't pitched 100 investors, slept 3 hours a night? You think I don't know what building from nothing feels like?" There was a pause. Not long, but just long enough to make something clear. They didn't know. They'd never bothered to ask. I've spent every dollar I've ever earned reinvesting in Technova. I continued, my voice trembling. "I live in a 600-square-foot apartment. I don't take vacations. I eat frozen dumplings for dinner, while your golden child gets to burn through spa candles and Instagram ads with my inheritance." Mom frowned like I was being unreasonable. "Your lifestyle is manageable. You've always preferred being low maintenance." That word, low maintenance, that's what I was to them. Convenient, quiet, easy to overlook. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood on tile echoed through the room like a slap. "You went around Gran's wishes," I said. "You took something that was meant for me." "We made a judgment call," Dad said, his voice firm now. "Because it's not about favoritism, Ava, it's about smart business. Sienna's expansion is time-sensitive. Yours? Well, you're still in beta, aren't you, beta? Like I was still some unfinished project. Oh, maybe. A risk. I felt like I was falling backwards into a void I didn't even know existed. And they were watching me drop arms folded, smiles polite. The brunch ended with a fake hug and a promise to circle back soon. I didn't say anything else. I walked out of that penthouse with numb legs and a hollow chest. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors opened, the lobby light felt too bright. The noise of clinking glasses and marble shoes around me didn't register. I walked straight outside, air sharp against my skin. And for the first time in years, I didn't know where I was going. I had built my whole life around proving myself, around the idea that if I worked hard enough, built something worthy enough, maybe they'd see me. Maybe they'd finally say, "We're proud of you too." But that day I realized some people don't want to see you rise, because your success makes their favoritism undeniable, and I'd just made them uncomfortable with how far I'd come. I didn't go home right away. I walked, miles maybe, past construction sites and coffee shops, past people laughing with friends, clinking glasses on outdoor patios. Everyone else's world kept turning untouched. Mine had split open. At some point, I ended up sitting on a bench in a city park I hadn't visited in years. I watched a little boy in a red hoodie chase pigeons while his dad followed behind with a juice box. The kind of normal that used to make me feel invisible now made me feel unsafe, unsteady. All I kept hearing was that line, "Sienna needs it more," as if my life, my company, my sacrifices were some kind of luxury hobby, as if building Technova had been a phase like deciding to dye my hair in high school. They took my trust fund and handed it to my sister like she'd dropped her purse and needed a few bucks for lunch. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted folder, where I kept everything. Technova's quarterly growth charts, the back-end infrastructure roadmap, the letters of intent from 2 major fintech partners, and the early-stage merger conversation with a European bank. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof that my little startup was already reshaping the future of digital finance. They never saw it, because they never looked. I remembered when I first pitched the idea of Technova, a streamlined, ultra-secure payment system that could integrate seamlessly across both legacy and emerging markets. I told my parents over dinner, thinking maybe they'd finally take me seriously. Dad didn't even look up from his soup. Mom blinked twice and said, "Is that like Venmo?" That was 3 years ago. Since then, I'd onboarded thousands of small business users, launched 3 proprietary features, and attracted multiple venture funds. But to them, I was still playing with apps. Meanwhile, Sienna was burning through money on custom logo rebrands and influencer partnerships that never converted. I once asked her casually how her burn rate looked. She blinked and said, "Oh, that's my CFO's job. I'm more the vision." Right, vision. And I was just code and caffeine. I pressed my palms into my knees and tried to steady my breath. The truth that hurt the most wasn't the money. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the clarity that I had spent my entire adult life quietly trying to earn the love of people who'd already decided where I belonged. And no amount of pitch decks, overnight launches, or Forbes shortlists could move me off the shelf they'd placed me on, the quiet one, the backup. And yet there I was, still sitting, still shaking, still hurting like a kid whose parents just forgot her name. I stayed on that bench until the sun started to dip behind the skyline, casting the city in gold. My phone buzzed a message from Charlotte. "Investor call confirmed for 10 a.m. tomorrow. You good?" I stared at the screen, then slowly typed back, "I'm good. Let's build." Because if the past few hours had taught me anything, it was this: they weren't coming to save me. They never had. And they never would. So I'd stop asking. I stood up, straightened my coat, and walked away from the park, not fast but with purpose. The pain wasn't gone, but something sharper had surfaced underneath it. Focus. My parents thought they'd ended a chapter by taking my trust fund. What they didn't know was they'd just started the plot twist. I didn't confront them. No angry phone calls, no passive-aggressive emails, no dramatic family fallout. I just stopped showing up. I stopped attending Sunday brunches. I skipped birthdays. I let the group texts go unanswered. When Mom sent me a casual, "Are you okay?" message 2 weeks later, I replied with a single word, "Fine." And that was it. It wasn't silence out of defeat. It was silence with intention. I redirected every ounce of my energy into Technova. I doubled the dev team, fast-tracked product launches, and pulled together a killer user acquisition strategy that grew our platform by 60% in a single quarter. Investors noticed. So did the media. But my parents still thought I was tinkering with that little app. There was something liberating about it being underestimated. It gave me room to operate in the shadows. I didn't have to explain my moves or justify my ambition. Nobody was watching, which meant nobody could interfere. And in that vacuum of their attention, I built an empire. Charlotte. My assistant was the only one who knew the full extent of what I was doing. She handled press inquiries, investor briefings, and the complicated shell structure I'd designed to protect our assets. She was sharp, discreet, and loyal, the kind of person who didn't blink when I told her I needed to create a holding company. "What are we calling it?" she'd asked. "Kingdom Ventures," I said. "It's time I start acting like someone who builds kingdoms." I still remember the look on her face, this quiet, satisfied nod that told me she understood exactly what I meant. Through Kingdom Ventures, I started acquiring pieces, small fintech firms, niche payment solutions, overlooked data infrastructure companies. One by one, they became part of a network that fed into Technova's future. And then one day, Charlotte walked into my office holding a file I didn't recognize. "You'll want to see this," she said. "Morgan Capital's quarterly earnings just dropped." Morgan Capital. My parents' legacy firm. I raised an eyebrow. "And they're bleeding," she said. "Revenue down 18%. Two of their biggest clients just jumped ship. And rumor is they're shopping for acquisition options." I sat still for a moment, letting the words hang there. My entire childhood was spent being told how bulletproof Morgan Capital was, how they weathered recessions, outplayed competitors, kept client trust in a world that changed too fast for most. My parents worshipped that company. It wasn't just a business, it was an identity. And now, it was dying. Charlotte slid another document across my desk. "A proposal draft. You could buy them," she said. "Easily. The board is fractured, morale is low. All it would take is a soft approach through Kingdom Ventures and a few strategic client shifts. They'd never see it coming." I stared at the folder, pulse steady. No rush of revenge, no fantasy of watching them beg. Just opportunity. And a strange kind of clarity. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful, but I did need to protect what I'd built. And buying the very company that once symbolized everything I wasn't, that wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I leaned back in my chair, the city skyline burning gold behind me. "Make the call," I said. Charlotte nodded once and walked out. I sat there a little longer, fingers steepled in front of my lips, letting the weight of the moment sink in. They took my trust fund and gave it to Sienna. I took that betrayal and turned it into a billion-dollar machine. They never believed in me. But now, they were about to work for me, and they didn't even know it yet. By the time the acquisition strategy was finalized, I had mastered the art of invisibility. Kingdom Ventures operated as a neutral player in the industry, faceless, discreet, and efficient. No red flags, no flashy headlines. We were exactly the kind of firm Morgan Capital would consider a rescue option without realizing they were walking into the arms of the daughter they'd underestimated. Charlotte coordinated the entire play like a symphony, one silent move at a time. We didn't attack Morgan Capital directly. That would have raised alarms. Instead, we quietly acquired 2 of their strategic partners. Then we offered buyouts to 3 of their mid-level advisors who were tired of being undervalued. Then we floated a discreet inquiry to the board through a third-party broker. Ava Morgan's name was never on anything, just Kingdom Ventures. By the time my parents realized what was happening, the ship was already halfway underwater. I remember the exact moment Charlotte walked into my office holding her tablet like it was a loaded weapon. "They've requested a meeting," she said. I looked up. "With who?" "With the CEO of Kingdom Ventures," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "They're desperate. The board is splintered. They've lost 3 major accounts in 2 weeks and their stock just took another hit." I said nothing. Just stared out the floor-to-ceiling window behind me. It was cloudy that day, the kind of overcast that makes a city feel like it's holding its breath. Charlotte stood still, waiting. Then I said the words I had been rehearsing in my head without realizing, "Tell them I'll see them next Thursday, and make them wait in the lobby." "How long?" 15 minutes. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I turned back toward my desk. "They made me wait 25 years for my future. They can wait 15 minutes for the meeting they think might save theirs." Charlotte just smiled and left the room. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, not to celebrate, just to breathe. I sat in my apartment, still the same small unit I'd been living in since before Technova took off, and let myself feel everything. The weight, the irony, the quiet justice. No cameras, no stage, no audience, just me. I thought back to the first time I showed my dad my pitch deck. I was 19, barely able to afford the software I'd built it on. He skimmed the first 3 slides, then handed it back. "Too niche," he'd said. "Nobody will use this." I thought about the time Mom told me, half joking, that I should consider applying to be Sienna's assistant since you're both into business now. I thought about every family dinner where I stayed quiet because I knew no one really cared what I had to say. And then I took another sip of wine and smiled. Because the truth was, they didn't just give my money to Sienna. They gave me freedom. No safety net. No expectations. No one to impress. Just the raw necessity to make it on my own and the grit to keep going when nobody believed I could. And now the company they'd spent 30 years building was one signature away from becoming mine. Not out of revenge, out of evolution. Because while they were busy protecting the past, I was quietly building the future. And next Thursday, they'd finally have to face it. Face me. Not the invisible daughter, not the second choice, but the woman they never saw coming because they never bothered to look. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 2 hours early. I didn't need to. Everything had already been prepared the night before. Conference room booked, documents printed, security cameras checked and re-angled. Charlotte had even arranged for the catering espresso sparkling water, nothing too indulgent. But I needed the silence. I needed the stillness before the performance began. I stepped into the executive suite on the top floor, the view of the skyline opening like a curtain to a city I had once felt too small for. I no longer did. The glass walls reflected a different version of me now. Gone was the hoodie-clad coder, the girl who took meetings from cramped coffee shops with borrowed Wi-Fi. Today, I wore a tailored charcoal suit, sharp at the shoulders, clean at the seams. My hair was slicked into a low bun, makeup understated but immaculate. I looked like power, because I was. "Your parents just arrived," Charlotte said through the intercom. Her voice was steady, but carried a note of satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. I turned toward the security monitor. There they were. My mother, still in pearls, always in pearls, sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap. My father stood by a floor-to-ceiling abstract painting, pretending to admire it, but clearly checking his watch every few seconds. "They don't know," I murmured. "No," Charlotte replied, almost amused. "They think Kingdom Ventures is run by some Wall Street upstart. They'll find out soon enough." She chuckled lightly. "Want me to make them wait longer?" I considered it. 15 minutes, I said. "Let them sit in it." I walked over to the long glass table and began laying out the materials. The buyout terms, the financial performance reports, proof of their declining ROI, investor dropouts, and outdated model. Everything they refused to see when I was just their startup daughter. Now they'd have to read it in black and white. And then finally, the document revealing the true ownership of Kingdom Ventures. No more hiding. They would sit across from me and realize the empire they were begging for help from belonged to the daughter they once dismissed as a hobbyist. Charlotte returned a few minutes later, heels silent against the marble floor. "They're getting nervous," she said. "Your dad's asked about you twice. Mom's checking her reflection every 30 seconds. I looked at her. "Bring them in." She nodded and turned away. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, gaze calm. The door opened quietly the way velvet curtains might part in a theater. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan Charlotte announced professionally, "Miss Kingston will see you now." They walked in with their best practiced smiles, businesslike, polished, a little too eager, the kind of look you wear when you know you're losing but still trying to win the room. "Miss Kingston," my father began, extending his hand. "We're honored to finally meet you. Thank you for agreeing to see us on such short." I turned around slowly, deliberately. Their words stopped mid-sentence. My mother's face froze, her eyes, wide mouth, slightly open. "Sarah," she whispered. I held her gaze, then gave a polite, restrained smile. "Actually, I said it's Ava. But today you may call me Miss Morgan." They didn't move. For a full 10 seconds they stood rooted in place as if I had turned to stone and taken them with me. My father blinked first. What is this?" I gestured calmly to the chairs across from me. "Have a seat," I said. "We have a lot to discuss." They sat, but everything about their posture had shifted. The confidence was gone. The control was gone. They weren't parents visiting a firm for negotiation anymore. They were guests in my house, guests who were about to discover the cost of underestimating the daughter they thought would never outgrow their shadow. I watched them settle into their seats, though settle was generous. My mother perched like she might take flight. My father kept adjusting his cuffs as if a well-fitted suit could disguise the unraveling beneath it. I let the silence linger. Let them study my face. Let them search for the version of me they used to know, the quiet one, the forgettable one, the fallback plan. She was long gone. "I suppose you're wondering how this happened," I said, finally breaking the silence. My father cleared his throat. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "Inside you'll find documentation confirming the full acquisition of Morgan Capital by Kingdom Ventures, terms, transition timeline, and a breakdown of your firm's valuation, which I should warn you dropped 12% just this past week." My mother reached for the folder with trembling fingers. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For someone so fluent in condescension, she suddenly had nothing to say. My father skimmed the first page, then looked up. You own this company?" I smiled faintly. "I own 6 companies. Kingdom Ventures is the umbrella. Technova, as you may recall the little app you dismissed. That was the start. I built it from my kitchen table while you were funneling my inheritance into Sienna's candle empire." He flinched. "Sienna's doing well," Mom said suddenly, almost defensively. "She's been expanding." "She shut down her West Coast branch 2 months ago," I interrupted. "She laid off half her staff. The spa in Santa Monica lasted 6 weeks." My mother blinked fast, caught off guard. "How do you know that?" she asked. I tilted my head. "Because I bought the property when her lease defaulted. It's being converted into a pilot hub for Technova's in-person small business training." The room went cold. "You knew," I said, voice low. "You knew Gran left that trust fund for me. You had to manipulate legal loopholes just to reroute it to Sienna. And you never even told her the truth, did you?" "She needed it," my mother said quietly. "No," I said, keeping my tone even. "You needed her to keep succeeding, because you built your identities on her image, and I was the quiet one, the safe one to ignore, the daughter who wouldn't fight back." My father shifted in his chair. "We did what we thought was right. You never needed—" "Don't," I cut in. "Don't pretend this was concern. You never even asked what I was building. You couldn't pronounce half the tech terms I used, so you assumed they didn't matter. You mistook what you didn't understand for failure." Silence settled again, but this time it was different. Heavier. Weighted with truth neither of them could run from. "You may not have handed me that trust fund," I continued, "but you handed me something better." My mother looked up slowly, confused. "You handed me freedom," I said. "No safety net, no approval, no backup plan. And in the absence of all that, I built something you couldn't even see coming." Charlotte entered the room quietly and placed 2 more files on the table. "These are your options," I said. "Sign the agreement and we begin the transition of Morgan Capital under my leadership. Refuse and I'll withdraw the offer. Given your current liabilities, I give you 3 months before bankruptcy becomes public." My mother's hand flew to her pearls. My father's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't," he said. I leaned forward slightly. "I already did." They stared at the folders in front of them like they were bombs about to detonate. And maybe they were. "You took everything from me," I said, voice quiet but unshakable. Now I own everything you built. For a second, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. They didn't touch the folders. My father sat back like someone had just told him the world was flat. My mother looked like she'd seen a ghost, or maybe the ghost of the daughter they never thought would rise above them. "This can't be right," Mom murmured, staring at the financial summary. "This valuation, it says Technova's worth nearly $1 billion. $850 million last round," I said. "We'll cross the billion mark by next quarter." Dad shook his head, still gripping his chair's armrest. How did we not know?" I let the silence stretch. "You didn't ask," I said simply. I pulled up the wall screen behind me and clicked a remote. Charts and graphs illuminated the room in pale blue light. Market share growth, partnership maps, platform adoption curves, all of it the digital kingdom I had built laid out like a crown made of numbers. "You never noticed because you never looked," I said. "Not when I pulled 14-hour days, not when I landed our first investor, not when Technova was featured in Wired. You were too busy funding Sienna's spa towels and aromatherapy rebrands." Mom's mouth opened, then closed again. "She needed help," she said at last, her voice fragile. "And you never asked for anything, because I knew what the answer would be." I clicked another slide. "This is your company now," I continued. "Or rather, this is what's left of it. Revenue down 28% over the last 2 quarters. Client churn at an all-time high. Your digital transformation initiative. 5 years too late." Dad blinked hard. "We were adapting. You were surviving," I corrected. "Barely. But it's not your fault. You were never trained to see the new world coming. That's why I'm here." I pressed a button. A new slide appeared, the Kingdom Ventures acquisition roadmap. At the top, my name. That's when Mom's hand started to shake. "This was all planned," she whispered. This was your goal the whole time." "No," I said honestly. "I didn't plan to buy you out. I planned to survive you." The buyout was just inevitable. They both stared at me. Not like I was their daughter, but like I was some stranger who'd walked in and taken over their lives. Maybe I had. "Thomas tried to contact you," Mom said, suddenly grasping for something. "He heard about Technova. Wanted to congratulate you." I raised an eyebrow. "Thomas. My brother. The golden son who failed upward 3 times and still got a standing ovation at every family event. The one they didn't bat an eye at when he asked for a 3rd investment, but called me reckless for buying an extra laptop for my dev team." I took out my phone and slid it across the table. On screen, a message from Thomas unread. "Hey sis, heard you're doing big things. Got time to catch up? I have a pitch I think you'd love." I had Charlotte block his number, I said coolly. "You gave him my future. I won't give him my present." My mother reached for the phone, then stopped halfway. Her fingers curled back slowly. "You're punishing us," she said. I met her eyes. "No," I said. "I'm showing you what happens when you bet against the wrong child." She looked down. And there it was, the first crack in the performance. The perfectly done makeup, the posture, the defiance. It all faltered under the weight of reality. "I don't understand," she whispered. "We thought you were fine." "I was," I replied, "because I had no choice but to be." Charlotte walked in then, holding a sleek folder. "The updated offer," she said, placing it gently between my parents. "You have 24 hours," I said. "Sign it and I'll save your company. Decline and I walk, and so do your remaining clients. I already sent feelers." My father stared at the folder like it might bite him. "You wouldn't." I stood. "I already did." Then I walked out of the room, leaving them alone with the weight of the daughter they never bothered to see until now. I didn't look back as I walked out. The conference room door shut softly behind me. Not a slam, not a dramatic echo, just a gentle click. But in that moment, it sounded final. Like the last page of a book I never chose to read finally closing. Charlotte was waiting by the reception desk, her tablet in hand, expression calm and unreadable. "Do you think they'll sign?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I moved to the window instead, watching the clouds roll over the skyline. From here, the city looked small, manageable, like pieces on a board I could rearrange if I stayed patient. They have no choice, I said. This isn't about saving face anymore. It's survival. Charlotte nodded. They looked stunned. They always thought the person with the quietest voice had the weakest hands, I said softly. She didn't respond, didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Power isn't loud. It's deliberate, quiet, surgical. My parents had spent years confusing noise for strength. But while they celebrated noise charity galas, social clubs, PR stunts, I'd spent my time building structure. Invisible, unshakable. Now the structure was holding, and they were crumbling. Later that night, I received a message from Charlotte they signed. Just 2 words. No exclamation points, no drama. And yet it hit harder than any speech I could have delivered. I sat in my apartment, the same place I had paced in 3 years earlier, wondering how I'd make payroll, staring at the screen until the glow felt too bright. Signed. Everything was official now. The company they had built, protected, and passed over me to preserve was mine. Not by birthright, not by charity, not even by vengeance, by merit, by execution. By every night I stayed up coding through exhaustion, every meeting where I bit my tongue while being underestimated, every moment they doubted I'd make anything of myself. I opened the documents Charlotte had forwarded. Their signatures were shaky, hesitant, but final. The finality didn't bring satisfaction, not right away. It brought stillness, a kind of peace I hadn't expected. Not joy, not triumph, just the absence of noise. The following morning, I watched them arrive at Technova's headquarters, not as owners, but as employees. Entry-level consultants on the client transition team. The same team I once begged my father to invest in when I was building it from scratch. Now he was sitting in their Monday onboarding session. My mother looked lost. The open floor plan, the casual dress code, the endless sea of standing desks and collaboration pods, it overwhelmed her. She clutched her handbag like it was the last piece of her old world she could still control. I didn't go down to greet them. I just watched through the security feed. Charlotte joined me a few minutes later, holding 2 coffees. "They're here," she said, handing me mine. "I know." We stood there in silence for a while, the 2 of us, 2 women who had built something that no one else believed in. 2 women who had been told we were support staff at best. Now we ran the empire. I had HR assign them both to the early-stage transition team, Charlotte said. They'll help migrate old clients to our digital platforms, mostly spreadsheets and phone calls. Perfect, I said. Thomas called again, by the way. Left a voicemail this time. I took a sip of coffee. Block him. Permanently. Charlotte smiled. Already did. As I turned back to the monitors, I saw my parents take their seats at the far end of the onboarding room. They looked smaller somehow, not just physically but stripped, diminished, like the weight of everything they'd denied was finally sitting on their shoulders. There was no applause, no collapse, no theatrical breakdown, just quiet consequence. And maybe that was the real twist. Not that I won, but that they had to watch me become everything they said I wasn't, and now they'd spend every day working inside a system I built. Under a name they never learned to say with respect. Mine. 3 days after they started, I passed them in the hallway. It wasn't intentional. I'd taken the back route to avoid a VC call that had run long. They came around the corner just as I stepped out of the stairwell, shoulders hunched, eyes low, both holding matching employee folders, the same kind we gave every new hire on day 1. We all stopped. They froze. My mother's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. My father straightened his spine out of reflex the way he used to when addressing clients. It didn't help. He still looked smaller. I gave them a nod. Not cruel, not cold, just distant. Then I walked past them. And for the first time in my life, they didn't follow. Later that afternoon, Charlotte dropped by my office. She looked mildly amused in that elegant way only she could manage. "Your parents made it through onboarding," she said. "Barely." I glanced up. "They show up on time 5 minutes early." "Impressive." She smiled. "Your dad asked it for help setting up his company email. He couldn't figure out how to download the app. Tell him to check the onboarding manual. Page 4. Already did. I let out a quiet laugh and leaned back in my chair. It wasn't schadenfreude, not exactly, just irony doing its slow lap around the track. Did they say anything about me? Charlotte shook her head. They haven't mentioned your name once, figures. But something in me softened not into forgiveness, but into recognition. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't built for that. They were built for pride legacy and saving face. But in the absence of an apology, there was still the weight of consequence. And that was enough. Because now every spreadsheet they opened, every customer onboarding call they took, every performance review they received, it would all be under my roof. My systems, my culture. They were learning in real time what they never bothered to teach me: humility. That night, as I walked through the nearly empty office, I found myself pausing at the small glass meeting room where I'd held my very first Technova strategy session. Back then, the space didn't even have chairs. We sat on the floor, laptops propped up on backpacks, sketching wireframes on printer paper. Now the room held a framed photo of our founding team. Most of them had moved on startups Rise and Rotate, but every face in that picture helped lay the foundation of what we'd become. I stood there for a while, hand resting lightly against the doorframe. There was something full circle about all of it. My parents had tried to rewrite the legacy my grandmother left me, but legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build brick by brutal brick, and what I'd built wasn't just a company. It was proof. Proof that quiet doesn't mean weak, that overlooked doesn't mean unworthy, that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage in the world if you know how to hold your breath and move in silence. I left the building that night without saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke to a message from my mother. It was short. "Thank you for letting us work. We'll do our best. No excuses, no guilt-laced emotional manipulation. Just that." And I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because she finally understood her best wasn't a gift to me. It was the bare minimum, and she was 25 years late. I closed my phone and turned toward the window, the city skyline glowing with the pale light of another sunrise. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need their approval. I had something better. I had truth. And from now on, they would live inside it. Somewhere along the way, the need to prove them wrong faded. It didn't happen overnight. There was no switch, no defining moment, just a slow, steady softening like the way winter loosens its grip before spring takes hold. One morning, I walked into the office and didn't even look toward the floor where my parents now worked. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. Their presence no longer controlled the temperature of my day. I had won, quietly, completely. But more importantly, I had let go. The victory wasn't in the papers they signed. It wasn't in the job titles or the net worth or the way investors now waited for my approval. It was in the fact that for the first time in my life, I no longer sought their validation. It was like walking without weight. There's a certain kind of clarity that comes after you stop chasing the apology you'll never receive. When you stop scripting conversations in your head that end with, "We're sorry we didn't believe in you," they weren't going to say that. And that was okay. Because somewhere along the line, I stopped needing their belief to validate my own. Instead, I started investing in the people who saw me clearly from the beginning. Like Marcus, my co-founder and CTO. He was the one who stuck around during our near failure in year 2 when we had 2 weeks of runway left and were sleeping in shifts just to keep our servers running. When the Series A fell through, he didn't walk away. He stayed up all night with me reworking the pitch. We landed an angel investor 5 days later. "Funny," he said once after seeing my parents in the office break room. "They look like ghosts now." "They kind of are," I replied. And it was true. They were remnants of a world that no longer held power over me, a world I used to orbit hungry for their attention, thirsty for their praise. Now they circled mine. After the acquisition, I made a quiet donation in my grandmother's name. She was the one who set up the trust fund in the first place, the one whose love never came with conditions. She believed in me before I became anything. When I was just the little girl with the sketchpad full of app ideas and mismatched socks, I didn't put my name on the donation, just hers. It felt right that way. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note in my office inbox. It was from my mother. I saw the donation. She would have been proud. We both would have if we'd taken the time to see you. Still no apology. but at least acknowledgement. I folded the note and tucked it into the drawer beside my desk, not because I needed to hold on to it, but because it no longer hurt to read it. Healing didn't come through confrontation. It came through creation. Through watching something I built out of rejection begin to lift other people. Our new mentorship program had already paired 10 young women founders with early-stage funding and resources. A few of them reminded me of myself, wide-eyed, underestimated, and quietly determined. They didn't need to fight to be seen. Not anymore. I made sure of that. And maybe that was the real closure. Not revenge, not retribution, but restoration, the kind that doesn't need a headline, just quiet, lasting impact. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward anymore. The road ahead was wide open, and I was already walking. The more time passed, the less I thought about the trust fund. It had been the spark, sure, the match that lit everything. But somewhere between sleepless launches, hard-earned partnerships, and a quiet takeover that shook our industry, the money stopped being the point. What mattered was what I'd built in its place. I began spending more time mentoring. Not just through our company's new Founders Initiative, but one-on-one in the corners of conferences over coffee with interns in late-night Slack threads, answering questions from women who reminded me of a younger version of myself. "You don't need permission to be extraordinary," I told one of them during a panel Q&A. "You just need discipline. And people who don't clap for you, let them stay quiet. You're not building for applause." The room went still, and then it broke into applause anyway. It wasn't pride that filled me in those moments. It was clarity. Because now my work wasn't about being seen by those who once looked away. It was about seeing others clearly, gently, fully. The kind of visibility I used to beg for, I now offered freely. I became a keynote speaker at a fintech summit 6 months after the acquisition. Charlotte joked it was poetic, the same industry that once refused to take me seriously now asked me to define its future. On stage, I told the story in fragments. Never by name, never by drama. Just the facts a young founder dismissed too early. A system that favored legacy over innovation. A family that confused love with control. And how quietly, steadily she built something too large to ignore. The crowd stood when I finished. Afterward, as I left through the back exit, someone tapped my arm. It was my father. He looked different. Less like the man who once scoffed at my first pitch deck, and more like someone who'd just realized the value of what he'd thrown away. "I saw your talk," he said quietly. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck like he wasn't used to saying what came next. "I always thought I was protecting you," he admitted. "Turns out I was just protecting my own ego." I didn't answer. Not right away. We stood in silence. Not tension, just space. A moment long overdue. "I was wrong," he added. There it was. The thing I never thought I'd hear. I looked him in the eye. "I didn't need you to say that I said, but I'm glad you did." He nodded. Not proud, not broken, just human. We parted ways at the service entrance, no dramatic hugs or forced reconciliations. But something settled, like a thread had finally been clipped clean instead of pulled tighter. The next day I returned to the office and passed by the floor where my parents now worked. I didn't stop, didn't look, but I knew they were there, still showing up, still learning, still quietly watching me lead. And that was enough. Later that week, Charlotte and I met in the rooftop garden. It had become our unofficial war room during the acquisition. Now it was just a place to breathe. "Looks like the noise is finally gone," she said, sipping her tea. "Yeah," I replied. "It's quieter now. But still yours." I smiled. That was the difference. For so long I thought success had to be loud to count. That they had to see it, name it, applaud it, for it to mean something. But now I knew better. Success isn't about being heard by the people who doubted you. It's about listening to yourself long enough to stop needing the echo. I found the box by accident. It had been tucked in the back of a storage cabinet in my apartment, long ignored, buried under old notebooks and early investor decks. I recognized it immediately. The worn edges, the faded handwriting. My grandmother's. Inside were letters. Old ones. birthday cards, small notes scribbled in cursive on linen stationery, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front. I hesitated before opening it. It felt like opening a window to a world I had shut tight. But I did. Inside was a short letter, handwritten, gentle. Exactly her. To Ava, it began. This money is only one part of the gift. The other part, the real part, is believing you'll use it to become exactly who you already are. You don't need to be loud to lead, just brave. I reread that sentence 3 times. You don't need to be loud to lead. My throat tightened. She had seen me, long before anyone else, and she had trusted me to make something from the roots she'd planted, not because I had to prove myself, but because she already believed I could. The trust fund was never about the money, it was about faith, and while my parents redirected the money, they could never redirect the faith she left behind. That part had always stayed with me, even when I doubted myself, even when I was building something in the dark with no applause, no headlines, and no soft place to land. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, not because I needed to hide it, but because I finally understood it. That same night, I sat alone in my living room, the city flickering quietly outside the window. For once, I wasn't thinking about next quarter's roadmap or board meetings or client onboarding. I was thinking about the version of me that used to walk this same apartment in circles at 2 a.m., whispering, "You can't quit." Not yet. Not after everything. She didn't get to see how this story ended, but I remembered her, and I owed her peace, so I did something I hadn't done in years. I closed my laptop before midnight. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and let the silence fill the room not as a void, but as a companion, a reminder that nothing was chasing me anymore. I wasn't running from failure. I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was just living. In a life I had designed with my own hands on my own terms. The next morning I arrived at the office early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I took the long way through the building, stopped at departments I usually passed, checked in with interns, shared coffee with the security guard who always greeted me by name, and when I finally walked into my corner office, the sun had just cleared the skyline, casting soft gold across the floor. This was my empire, not built from revenge, not sustained by resentment, but powered by quiet endurance, fierce clarity, and finally, freedom. And somewhere maybe my grandmother was watching the woman who first believed that leadership wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about listening to yourself even when no one else does. I sat down, took a breath, and opened my calendar. The future didn't scare me anymore, because for the first time, the past didn't own me either. The email came just before lunch. Subject line lunch, if you're open to it. It was from my mother. No grand explanations, no guilt-laced paragraphs, just a simple ask. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure how I felt. Not angry, not even surprised, just unsure. It had been nearly 4 months since the acquisition. In that time, we'd crossed paths maybe twice. Cordial nods, shared elevators, nothing more. She had kept her head down at work, showed up on time, completed her training modules, even helped 2 clients transition to our digital system with unexpected grace. Still, I wasn't expecting a lunch request. Charlotte raised an eyebrow when I told her, "You gonna go?" I sipped my coffee and thought about it. Maybe I would have said no 6 months ago. Maybe I would have deleted the email without reading it, just to reclaim some tiny sliver of power they'd once denied me. But that wasn't who I was anymore. The woman I'd become didn't need to punish. She needed to choose. And so I did. The following day, I met her at a quiet cafe near the harbor. Neutral territory. Nothing dramatic. No press, no boardroom tension. Just 2 women sitting across from each other with a long silence between them. She looked nervous. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. Eventually, she spoke. "I've been thinking about your grandmother," she said, "and how sure she was. About you." I said nothing. She was right. Still, I waited. I spent a long time thinking success looked a certain way. She added, voice softer now. Legacy. Appearances. Control. And I think, in trying to protect that I didn't protect you. There was a tremble in her voice I hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. Not performance, not manipulation, just truth. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she continued. I just wanted to say, I see you now. And I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. For a moment, neither of us moved, and then I nodded, not as a daughter seeking peace, but as a woman who had already found it. I stopped needing your permission a long time ago, I said gently, but thank you for saying it. She exhaled. A long, quiet release. We talked for 45 minutes, not about the past, not about the company, just small things, books, the city, how the cafe's lemon tart was still too sweet. When we stood to leave, she paused. I hope we can talk again. I didn't make promises, but I smiled, and somehow that was enough. As I walked back to headquarters, I felt lighter, not because anything had been fixed, but because it didn't need to be. We'd stopped trying to rewrite what had already been lived and started learning how to live forward. At the office, I stepped into a pitch meeting with a young founder named Lila. She reminded me so much of myself it was almost unsettling, all fire, no cushion, pitching something brilliant with trembling hands and absolute clarity. When she left, Charlotte turned to me. Was that what you were like? No, I said. She's better. Charlotte smiled. You made space for her to be. And in that moment it hit me. This, not the takeover, not the $5 billion portfolio, not even the poetic justice, this was the real legacy. Creating space for people like me to not just survive but thrive. I looked out over the city, the sky fading into soft blue-gray. No lightning strikes, no revenge speeches, just calm, quiet, steady. I'd won. But more than that, I'd healed. The next board meeting felt different. Not because of who was sitting at the table, though, yes, there were new faces, fresh energy, younger minds. But it wasn't the personnel that marked the shift, it was the air. For the first time in this company's history, and perhaps in mine, the room wasn't filled with tension, ego, or legacy wounds. It was filled with momentum. I sat at the head of the table, the sunlight casting quiet gold across the table's polished surface. Charlotte sat to my left, calmly reviewing a quarterly report. Marcus across from me outlined our latest product roadmap with a confidence that reminded me how far we'd both come. And on the far side of the room, 2 seats down from the investors, my parents. No titles, no special introductions, just 2 employees analysts in the transition department invited to observe as per the rotational transparency program I'd introduced after the acquisition. It was ironic, really. They once saw this room as a summit, a place reserved for the powerful, untouchable. Now they were inside it because of a system I built, one that valued access over appearance. I didn't look at them during the meeting. I didn't need to. They didn't interrupt, didn't posture, just listened, took notes. It was in its own way a form of reverence. After the meeting, as people filtered out, my father lingered near the window. He was staring at the skyline arms, folded brows furrowed, not in judgment, but something closer to reflection. It's strange, he said when I approached, to be part of something you didn't build but know you could have if you'd listened better. I said nothing. Then he looked at me, and this time his voice didn't carry pride or regret, just clarity. You're doing more than we ever did. He meant it. I knew he did. Still, I offered no validation. I didn't need to. That wasn't what this moment was about. It wasn't about approval. It was about balance, alignment. What was broken had been acknowledged. What was lost had been rebuilt. And what had been taken was now returned. On my own terms. Later that evening, I walked past the hallway where we'd installed the new vision wall, a living digital mural that featured rotating highlights of Technova's founders' partners and breakthrough moments. My grandmother's photo was there, not posed, not promotional, just her watering the tiny lemon tree on her Brooklyn patio. The one she used to tell me was a stubborn little thing just like you. Next to it, a small plaque, for those who see the future before others do and choose to water it anyway. I stood there for a moment, hand resting gently on the wall. No spotlight, no applause, just truth. I hadn't just taken back what was mine, I'd expanded it, protected it, shared it. And now the future was no longer something I was chasing. It was something I was shaping. A few weeks later, I stood on stage again this time, not for investors, not for press, but for the next generation. We were launching the Nova Bridge program, a platform that offered mentorship capital and training for first-time founders from underserved communities. The same kinds of people who, like me, had once been told they were not quite the right fit. My voice was steady as I spoke, not because I rehearsed every line, but because every word came from lived experience. When the doors don't open for you, I said to the crowd, you don't have to wait outside. You can build your own. Applause followed, but I barely registered it. My eyes scanned the front row where Lila, the young founder from a few months ago, sat with her demo team. They'd just received their first round of funding. Her eyes were wide, focused, ready. I recognized that fire. It used to burn in me when I was just trying to make rent while coding back-end systems on a used laptop. After the event, she came up to me holding her pitch deck with both hands. "You don't know what this means," she said, breathless. "I do," I replied. "That's the difference." Later, as I walked through the office, I passed the break room where my parents now took lunch like everyone else. I didn't stop, but I saw my mother laughing with a younger teammate helping her navigate a tricky client query. Not out of superiority, but support. It was subtle, small, but something in her had shifted. She'd stopped trying to preserve a fading identity and started participating in something real. That afternoon, Charlotte forwarded me a report. Employee retention had jumped 14% since the acquisition. Client satisfaction was the highest it had ever been, and the Bridge program had received 76 applications within its first 72 hours. I sat back in my chair, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just a recovery story. It was a reinvention, one where the child they underestimated didn't just rise, she rewrote the blueprint. One where power wasn't hoarded, it was handed down, passed forward, scaled out. And the best part, it was all just beginning. I thought about my younger self again, the girl who'd watched her parents transfer away her future over brunch like it was a business transaction. She would have cried back then, and she did. But if she could see this now, she'd smile, not out of vengeance, but because she'd know that one day, none of that pain would define her. Only what she built from it would. It was a quiet Friday when the letter arrived. Not an email, not a memo. A real letter, hand-addressed, tucked inside a pale blue envelope with a return address I recognized immediately. Thomas. I hadn't heard from him in nearly a year. The last message I remembered from him was a text, "Need any help between ventures?" Back when he realized the $2 million he burned through wouldn't magically regenerate. I debated for a moment, then opened it. The letter was short. Ava, I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I messed up, badly. I know I never earned what they gave me, and I never appreciated what you were building until it was too late to be part of it. I hope you're still doing incredible things. You always were the one who knew where the world was going. Thomas. I read it once, then folded it gently and set it in the drawer beside my grandmother's note. Not for nostalgia, not for reconciliation, but as a marker of where we'd all landed. He wasn't asking to come back, just acknowledging where the story had gone without him. And I respected that. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner for our senior team. No press, no formal agenda, just conversation, laughter. The sound of plates being passed around a long table as the sun dipped low over the skyline. Marcus made a toast near the end. To Ava, he said, raising his glass. For building something they told her she wasn't ready for, and then making space for the rest of us to follow. I smiled but didn't say anything right away, because what I was thinking wasn't about me. It was about every voice that had been quieted, every dream delayed, every idea dismissed because it didn't come in the expected package. I just kept going, I finally said. That's it. I kept going long enough for the story to change. And maybe that's the heart of it. Justice didn't arrive in a headline. It came in the small things, the respect earned through persistence, the healing found in creating space for others. The quiet understanding that power, when held gently, becomes something more than control. It becomes legacy. A few days later, as I walked through the Technova lobby, I passed a young intern nervously rehearsing her introduction for her first client meeting. She saw me and froze, eyes wide. "You don't have to be perfect," I told her with a soft smile. "You just have to be prepared." She let out a nervous laugh. "Thanks, Miss Kingston." I paused, then corrected her gently. "Just Ava is fine." And with that, I walked on, no longer proving, no longer chasing, no longer carrying the weight of what was taken, because I had already turned that weight into something unshakable, something entirely my own. People often ask me now what changed, what turned the girl they dismissed into the woman sitting at the top of an industry they once ignored. Was it revenge, ambition, luck? But the truth is quieter than that, more personal, less cinematic. What changed was me. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, the way a tree strengthens its roots underground where no one can see. I stopped looking for the apology. I stopped waiting for permission, and I stopped shrinking myself to fit into rooms that weren't built for me. Instead, I built new rooms, with longer tables, softer lighting, open doors. I used to think the worst part of being underestimated was the silence, the way people looked past you, not even bothering to say you couldn't because they simply assumed you wouldn't. But now I understand silence can also be an invitation to write your own script, to move in your own rhythm, to stop performing and start building. That's what I did. And in doing so, I became someone I could trust. Someone my younger self would recognize, not because I finally had the titles or the money, but because I led with something far rarer: clarity. I no longer needed to prove them wrong. I just needed to keep proving myself right. Looking back, I don't regret the trust fund being taken. I don't regret the years I spent fighting to be seen, only to realize the real fight was always to see myself. What I do regret, if anything, is the time I lost, doubting what I already knew in my bones, that I was capable, that I was worthy, that I was enough. And now I carry that knowledge not like a sword, but like a compass. It doesn't cut anymore. It guides. Because the path to real power isn't paved with revenge. It's paved with resolve, quiet, firm, unshakable, and that's the kind of power no one can take from you. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd become someone others looked up to, I probably would have laughed. Back then, I was just trying to survive, trying to hold on to my ideas long enough to make payroll, trying to stay afloat while people with louder voices and longer resumes filled rooms I couldn't get into. But somewhere between the silence and the setbacks, I learned something that changed everything. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to change the room. You just need to stay in it long enough to be heard. And now I stay. I show up not for recognition but for the people coming next. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible. I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who don't believe in you even if they say they do. To be called promising but never ready. To have your ideas praised in theory but passed over in practice. I've lived that, and I've outgrown it. But instead of closing the door behind me, I keep it open. That's the difference between success and legacy. Success is reaching the top. Legacy is making sure the staircase stays in place after you do. So that's what I've built, not just a company, but a culture. One where young women can speak first in a meeting without being interrupted. Where first-generation founders don't need to explain their backgrounds like disclaimers. Where failure isn't fatal, it's part of the blueprint. I see the faces in our mentorship program, some eager, some guarded, all brilliant. And I remember what it felt like to be underestimated. Now I teach them how to be undeniable, because you can't control who tries to dim your light. But you can learn how to shine anyway. That's the real shift. That's the real freedom. And when I stand at the front of a room or sit quietly at the back, letting others take the mic, I no longer carry the weight of what I lost. I carry the strength of what I chose to build. And that is the part of the story I'm proudest of. If you're still listening, still holding on through the doubt, the silence, the doors that keep closing, let me leave you with this. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not too small. You're exactly where you need to be. Because the path to becoming isn't paved in applause, it's carved in quiet persistence. In the early mornings when no one's watching, in the moments you choose to stay when walking away would be easier. I used to think revenge would feel like fire, like standing over the ruins of everything they said I couldn't do, smiling as it all burned. But that's not what this is. This feels more like sunlight, warm, steady, quietly rising. Because real power doesn't shout, it doesn't crush, it doesn't need to prove itself anymore. It simply is, and now every time I walk into my office or stand beside a young founder preparing her first pitch or see my grandmother's picture on the vision wall, I remember, this didn't happen to me. It happened through me. And maybe, just maybe, all those locked doors weren't a barrier. Maybe they were redirections toward something bigger, something stronger, something mine. So if you're waiting for permission, this is it. Build it, name it, protect it. And when they finally see you, really see you, let it be, not because you demanded their attention, but because you earned your place without ever needing their validation. Sometimes the best revenge is never needing revenge at all.